I wanted to lead you into tremendous times, and that's what the series is about. But there was something about the prophet Jeremiah that wouldn't leave me alone this week. I got to thinking about him, and I got to thinking about that very statement that Reformation is not revival. And we found that Jeremiah was a prophet that was sent by God. He had a divine message because he had a divine mission. And when he preached that message, there should have been a direct response. In essence, what happened, the people rejected the message of the prophet. They said no. They said, we will not. And so it produced in that prophet this deep mourning. And you can look throughout the book of Jeremiah and into the book of Lamentations, and you can see that this prophet's soul is upset. And so that's why Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet, because he saw the people, Israel, and in this case Judah, and he was sent to prophesy, to give them a message from God. Now, I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I'm going to tell you who's going to win the Super Bowl. The one that scores the most points. And there's no charge for that. You don't need to go to DraftKings. You heard it right here, right? I'm not the son of a prophet, but there are certain things that the Lord shows me. Usually, I preach the message that I preach to you at least 2 or 3 more times. Ask my wife. Sometimes I'll be off in what she thinks is la-la land, and I'm just going through everything. And there are a million things I would have liked to have said and didn't. So this is Reformation is not revival, part 2. Now, I have to give Josiah, the Josiah in the Bible, the credit for bringing about Reformation. There are going to be some things that I say this morning that you could probably recognize throughout history have happened. Some of the greatest revivals that have occurred in the world, I mean, we're talking about revivals that shook the continent, happened because of Reformation. Because there was somebody somewhere that decided this isn't right. We need to do something different. And so Josiah was one of those kings that did right in the eyes of the Lord. And as a result, there were various projects that were started. Some things were immediately sacrificed. I mean, they were done away with completely. He tore down the altars of Baal. He took those false religious artifacts and he burnt them. He got rid of them. He got the priests right. He got things so headed in the right direction that there were some people that certainly followed. And so while I said Reformation is not revival, let's don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are things that Reformation brings that bring about revival. At least they can. And so it's a little bit out of character if you understand Jeremiah's mission. Everything seems to be going really well. Now, not for Israel proper, because the Assyrians have already taken them into captivity, and soon to follow will be Judah and Benjamin. And they will be carried into captivity. And so God sends this prophet in the latter reign of Josiah. And there were probably people there that really didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear this message of doom and gloom. They wanted to sit comfortably in their homes, food on the table, gas in the car, some money in the bank, and everything is just simply great. Why do you want to keep bringing up the negative? Well, I couldn't let that go. And I kept looking at that, and I kept asking myself, why am I so bothered by that? I appreciate the idea as to we reel in, we focus, we align ourselves up with the mission of God, and it is the gospel. We just had our first primary Sunday school class this morning with our first primary student. We just dedicated a nursery last week. The way that I reel you in, and the way that I try to keep this real is, I think that we should have done a much better job at preaching on the kingdom, since it's going to be a vital part of our life in the future. But what about now? What about right now? And so there are those things that we do and that we say that promote the right now. We keep the gospel in front of people, seeing boys and girls and young people. The next project on the agenda is to give the youth a room downstairs. And these little projects, not little in importance, they tend to keep our feet on the ground instead of our head in the clouds. That doesn't mean I'll quit preaching on the kingdom or that I'm going to finish up the series today, but I am going to look at something that is a little bit more troubling to me, and that is that Reformation itself is not revival. Now, in Josiah's time, there was a revival. There were things that were done that caused the people to sit up and take notice. But yet God saw fit in his sovereignty to send this prophet to preach this message of judgment. And I'm certain that there were probably some that thought, he ought to leave well enough alone. I see that Gaza's back in the news. And I don't know if our president has in his mind to put condominiums there. I'm not really sure what he's got going there. But there were some things that kind of drew me back in. Hamas and Israel and how far should we take our support of Israel and what do we think about Israel? Well, I'm going to try to answer that in the course of this morning's message. And so I really need to get started. So I'm going to try to do that in a very unique way. In Judges chapter 16, we're going to read about a guy. You know him because of his great acts of strength, feats that were probably not for the faint of heart. There's a guy by the name of Samson. And we all kind of like to get into those messages that talk about Samson and David, and we like to think in terms of our heroes, and certainly Samson had his problems. I think it was Chuck Swindoll that first aired a radio program calling him the He-Man with a she weakness. And certainly that would pretty much be spot on. Just going to read 3 verses, and then I'm going to go someplace in Jeremiah. In Judges chapter 16, then went Samson to Gaza. Did that get your attention? Then went Samson to Gaza and saw there a harlot. It's a prostitute. And he went in unto her. I don't think I need to be graphic. I think you understand what's implied there. And it was told to Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city. And they were quiet all night long, saying, in the morning when it is day, we shall kill him. Well, what happened? Sometimes in one verse, God makes such a huge statement that we just miss it because it's one verse. It says there in verse 3, and Samson lay till midnight and arose at midnight. And he took the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts and went away with them. He carried them away, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders and carried them up to the top of a hill that is before Hebron. Wow. I don't know how much weight. I'm certain it was awkward. But the man tore out the gate of the city. Steel, bars, stone, put it upon his back, and marched to Hebron. You want to know how far that was? 36 miles. 36 miles this man carries the gate of the Gazites to Hebron. Well, what's so special about Hebron? Abraham lay there in Judges 14. They buried Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant. It's symbolic that Samson would pick that gate up, and I could certainly see taking it a few feet, maybe a mile, but 36 miles? Come on, man. What are you trying to prove? He's not trying to prove anything. God is. God is showing us something, that he will not be defeated. And the human instrumentality that he used in that case was Samson. And we all know how this ends. It doesn't end well for Samson. Thankfully, at the end of his life, with his eyes gone, he slew more people in that one day than in its entirety of his life. And it's fun to read, it's fun to speculate, but when you dig into it, you find that it's bigger than Samson. Almost 100 years later, there's a young shepherd boy by the name of David in 1 Samuel 17. And once again, the armies of the Philistine, the Gazites, those from Gaza, they rise up and they taunt Israel. And there's a fellow that we are all familiar with by the name of Goliath, a giant in those days. And every morning he would come out and he would taunt the Israelites. He would say, "Send me somebody that's worthy of my time." And of course, you know the end of that story. They cowed down, and not necessarily cowardice, but they cowed down being very cautious that no man would certainly go out and challenge this behemoth of a man, until one little shepherd boy comes along with his brother's lunch. And in 1 Samuel 17, verse 29, he says, "What's going on?" The battle lay in wait. Nothing's happening. And he declares, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he would defy the armies of the living God? Is there not a cause? And we all like the story of David and Goliath, don't we? We like that. We like how that ends up. I've preached several messages at youth camps in that very valley. There was a place of divine mission. There was a person in the life of David, and there was a promise. And the promise was this: today I will fight. I will fight. God will fight for us. And we all know that David, he took from his bag that small smooth stone, and he flung that stone and hit that giant right between the eyes. You want to know how accurate the Bible is? The Bible says he fell forward. That's what happens when you die instantly. You fall forward. And he took the sword, and as graphic as this is, and all the teenagers are going, "Yeah, man," and he took the head from that giant. What you probably didn't know was that on April the 29th, 1956, there's a young man by the name of Rohi. And he's patrolling what was then the cornfield, the produce field that lie between Gaza and Israel. And he did this daily. And he did this because in his mind, the expectation was somehow we've got to get along. And so he was hopeful that on that morning things would be as usual and there would be peace in that Gaza Strip and particularly in that particular field. But there were Arabs there, Palestinians, that were taking produce, vegetables. They were stealing. Rather than create a big to-do, he thought, well, it's just a few. I'm just going to go and say something to them, and that was it. So he rode up on his horse, came upon the Arabs, and he said, basically, guys, you're not supposed to be doing this. It was a trap. They killed him. They shot him. Then they beheaded him. They mutilated his body. On October the 7th, 2023, there was a group of Hamas that killed 1,200. They raped, they cut off genitals, they killed a woman that was pregnant, 33 Americans, took 250 hostage, and their end goal was not the 1,200 that they slew. It wasn't geopolitical. When I use that term, what do I mean? I mean, it wasn't really about boundaries or deeds. It is theopolitical. Now, you'll look in your dictionary and you won't find that word. Geopolitics is about boundaries, about deeds. Theopolitics is about an ideology. What they wanted, they achieved. For the first time in America's history, there were students protesting, parades that were taking place, propaganda that was being distributed on U.S. soil in U.S. campuses, and for the first time in our history, especially Generation Z, and those are particularly those young adults from 18 to 24, 60% of those that were polled said that they could finally understand. They could finally see that terrorism is a tool in getting people's attention for change on American soil. Reformation is not revival. And the reason that I'm troubled and the reason that I bring this to your attention is because I would like to see some things happen. I would like to see some reform. I would like to see some things that should have never been allowed in the first place. There's a certain political party that used that as their slogan. We don't need to go backward. We need to go forward. Well, if going forward is the way you've been going, I'll take backward. And you might not think that I have a book, chapter, and verse for that, but I do. There are going to be things that I can't explain. But there are some things that God has showed, and I believe is continuing to show me and others maybe like me. Maybe they have more of a political base. Maybe they have more of a I don't want to call it a fan base, but they have more of an audience than I do. But my audience is not any less important, is it? And so some of what I'm going to do today is a timeout from our series on Tremendous Times, because I've been led to a particular section in the Bible. And I thought last week, I'm going to dispel all rumor that God doesn't have a sense of humor. I mean, last week, you've got to admit, God has got a flair for object lessons and for illustrated sermons. And so when we looked there in Jeremiah 13 and we looked at the holy underwear and we recognized that God had a message, and I couldn't necessarily say that it was a message for everybody, but it was a message for at least two people. Jeremiah and his scribe, a fellow that we do not know and we do not familiarize ourselves with him very much. But in Jeremiah 36, he's named, is a fellow by the name of Baruch. And he is a scribe. And he would write down the words of the Lord as they came to Jeremiah. He would write these down in a scroll. And you remember I told you that there were at least 5 kings that Jeremiah would minister throughout his ministry over 42 years. Well, there was a fellow by the name of Jehoiakim. And when Jeremiah had his scribe write down those words, you know what he did with them? He burnt them. He burnt them. You see, a scribe or a servant in the Old Testament, and most of the prophets had them. They were called forerunners. And that just simply means that when the prophet was coming to town, this man who served that prophet would run ahead of time, and it's like an advertisement. And he would cry out, "The prophet is coming, the prophet is coming." Well, we know from Scripture that that guy's name is Baruch. But as you read through the book of Jeremiah, the people had a very unique way of treating that prophet. When the scribe would run through the streets and say the prophet is coming, the people would shut their doors, lock them, close their windows, and they wouldn't come out. They didn't want to hear the message of Jeremiah. Now, there are always going to be, and I'll use this term a couple, 2, 3 times, there's always a remnant. There are always people that love God. I'm thankful for that. And there were people in Josiah's day that loved the Lord. But there was something in the nation of Judah that God saw. So he sends Jeremiah to preach about judgment. I read in chapter 13, I read about that object lesson. And it was designed to show the prophet that I have tried, God has tried to draw close to his people. And they, as a nation, continually rejected. They said, no, we'll have none of that. Now remember, there's always a people that they don't believe like that. Right now, we see a lot of things on the agenda. There's a lot of reformation, a lot of reforming that's taking place. You may agree with some things. You may disagree with other things. And I'm going to be rather blunt. Most Americans care about 3 things: food on the table, gas in the car, and money in the bank. Those are not necessarily bad things to have. What I'm needing you as a congregation to see is that Reformation in and of itself does not bring revival. Laura will tell you, I was up Friday night till 5:30 in the morning, and I was just troubled. I was troubled not just because I may be physically hurt, but I was troubled because I think that we as a church need revival. I'll say that one more time. I think that we as a church need revival. Now, there is a revival that's going to take place in Canton, and the Irwins are going to be there. And it's over a 3-day period. Brother Dennis will be preaching, and it is a revival service. I know it's a long trip for us to make. And some of those nights will be school nights. As I struggled with that, the Lord just kind of kept impressing upon me this thought. You don't have to go to Canton to have revival. Revival can start anytime God's people entertain the importance of revival. Now, usually I have one or two responses. Somebody will think, okay, that's a good idea. Let's all get revived. Or I'll have, well, what do we need to be revived for? Are we dead? No. But sometimes I think we can become complacent. We become a routine. We do things the same way, the same time every week, and not anything necessarily wrong with that. But when I look at the bigger picture and the overview, and I see that there is a carefully thought out plan that's bigger than one man, it's bigger than one nation, and I believe that the person that's behind it is the devil, is Satan. And I think it's easy for a country to become complacent. You watch the stock market. It's up and down, up and down. Somebody will throw something out and they'll respond to it. I don't know if the first thing that you look at when you look at your phone in the morning is the stock market, but it does get our attention, doesn't it? We want to see how things are going. In your Bible, there is a nation that parallels America right now. And so, here we go. Jeremiah chapter 6. I mentioned it last week, but I didn't give you book, chapter, and verse. In fact, I just mentioned it. And it's a parallel text with the importance of what Samson did, what David did, what that man that you probably had never heard of did in 1956, and what you recently are familiar with in 2023 with Hamas. What you may not realize is that it is not about geopolitics. It's not about boundaries. It's about theopolitics. It's about ideas. Hamas's end game is not killing 1,200 people. Their end game is to annihilate Jews and Christians alike. It's to make them, in their eyes, unholy. And there are people on Capitol Hill that don't get that. They think it's always been about boundaries. Boundaries can change, by the way, but theopolitics never does. It's always about an ideology. And what is the ideology? Is that we conquer. We conquer. We take over. And so I'm going to get through this rather quickly, so I know that's hard for you to imagine. But in Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 9, thus saith the Lord, there it is again. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall thoroughly glean the remnant of Israel as a vine. Turn back thy hand as a grasshopper into the baskets. That's a euphemism we don't fully understand. To whom shall I speak and give warning, that they may hear? Behold, their ear is unhearkened, or it is uncircumcised. They cannot hearken. Behold, the word of the Lord is unto them a reproach. They have no delight in it. Therefore, I am full of the fury of the Lord. I am weary with holding in. I will pour it out upon the children abroad and upon the assembly of the young men together. For even the husband with the wife shall be taken, the aged with him that is full of days. And their houses shall be turned into others, with their wives, with their fields and wives together, for I will stretch out my hand upon the inhabitants of the land, saith the Lord. The first thing that I need for you to understand is that the problem starts in the most of unlikely places. Here. Here. In the pulpit. There is a false message that has been sent that we're all okay, you're okay, I'm okay. Let's hope that reform will bring about the necessary change, but as long as I've got food on the table, gas in the car, and money in the bank, we're all okay. And it is a message that's propagated, and it starts right here in the pulpit. Now, I have to be really careful here. I can't point my finger, because every time I point my finger, I've got 3 coming back at me, right? And so I have to be very, very careful here. I do not admit, nor will I ever, that I haven't preached the whole counsel of God anywhere that I've been. But we can become complacent as a nation. And there's a false motive here. What is that? What is the motive? Well, as hard as it is for me to, if I can dish it out, I got to be able to handle it when it's come back at me. You agree? I should be able to. So first of all, there's a false motive. What is the motive? For from the least of them, even unto the greatest of them, everyone is given to covetousness. And from the prophet, even unto the priest, everyone dealeth falsely. Are you tired of being lied to? I'm sick to death of it. I'm tired of being lied to. I don't care if it's the president, the pope, or the pastor across the street. I'm tired of being lied to. Everything's not okay. We're waiting upon the judgment of God to fall. And we're going to fold our hands peaceably as long as we understand what the motive is. And what was the motive of the prophets and the priests in that day? Line my pockets. Line my pockets. How will it affect me? Now, without being hard or unsensitive, do we really care about the reformation that the president is making? Or do we really only care about it as it affects us? And once again, I'm trying not to be very political here. I'm just trying to use that as an example. What really moves us? What really motivates us? You know, I looked on the face of everybody around that room in that nursery last week, and I saw hope and change and ambition, and there was an excitement. And not just for the painted walls, but for the people that you hope to gain from the painted walls. And I heard guys talking about doing this and doing that, but there's a reason behind it. And that's when we get to what disturbs me the greatest, is a false message. What was the message in Josiah's day? Now, once again, remember, not everybody, not every priest, not every prophet prophesied this way. But enough did so that God sent Jeremiah along with Baruch. He sent him because he had a divine mission with a divine message. And yeah, there will be deep mourning of that prophet. We found all the way back in Jeremiah chapter 1. Before I knew you, before I formed you, before I fashioned you, that you were going to be a prophet of mine. And I'm going to send you in is probably the best of worst of times. When things are on the upbeat. They've turned a corner. Everything looks great. Do you know what I hope this next 4 years brings us? Prosperity, productivity, all of the things that have been promised. But there's one thing that nobody talks about, and it's about a nation turning their heart back toward God. Give me peace. Give me prosperity. Make your promises and then keep them, and I'll be okay, while the country is dying and going to hell. You say, well, what do you mean by a false message? Well, here it is right there. What was the message in that day? They have healed also the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Well, how bad is that? It's the idea of projecting something that's not really there. The prophets and the priests of Jeremiah's day were among the people. They were saying, everything's okay now. Everything's fine. We turned the corner. And for many, it did bring about revival. That's why I said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe, just maybe, some of the Reformation that we see over the next 4 years might bring a revival. I doubt it, but might. That's this preacher's hope and prayer, that the nation turns back to God. I mean, I'm all excited about this coming kingdom and about that uninhibited worship, and I can't wait to do a jig in front of Jesus. But I'm telling you, until then, we're in serious trouble. I know you didn't come in here and want to hear that. And I'm probably just as guilty. I don't like you to leave here all down in the mouth and feeling like, well, that was sure great. That was sure fun to be in church today. But listen, and I've given this to you once before, and I hope you wrote it down. There is something innately wrong with a people, with a church, I don't care where it is, in America, around the world, across the street, or right here, when all we want to do is offend everybody. I don't like to be offensive. I make sure I put on deodorant before I get in here. Nobody wants to be offensive. But you ought to write this next part down. There is equally something wrong with a church that never offends anybody. Oh, it's all good. Peace and safety. Aren't we really excited about closed borders? And you're missing the whole point. So, I have to do my part. I don't do it every Sunday. I think you can admit that, right? I don't bring these kind of messages every Sunday, but I'm not apologizing for them either. There was the falsehood, the lie that apparently much of Judah bought into. Because they had a good leader, everything's okay. Well, apparently not, because God sent them Jeremiah. You really want to get to the heart of the matter, look at the previous chapter in Jeremiah chapter 5. He begins to go and he says, the people have no fear of me. I'm the same guy that created the heaven and the earth. I put the oceans where they are and the sand where they are. In other words, you may have a tidal wave, you might have a tsunami, but the ocean goes back to where God has placed a boundary. God holds this world in the palm of his hand. Not science or man. God. Even to the reaping of a harvest and the giving of rain. And the people had forgotten that in Jeremiah chapter number 5. So in chapter 6, he gets to the heart of the matter. There's a false motive here. We need to really check our motive. Do I want to count people because people count? Or am I in the business of just counting people? I'm not trying to do a semantical thing here for you, but I want you to understand that we count people because people count. Those kids count. Those babies count. Their parents matter. And this church is a light. It's a beacon of light in a neighborhood. By the way, I was telling Laura this week, unsolicited. I told her this. There is, according to Christianity Today and other polls, there's a resurgence of the neighborhood church. People are going back to small group settings. Do you know where that model first showed itself? In the 50s and 60s. Great churches were built through their Sunday schools. And then we got away from that. We had the celebration model. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that. We preached in a church down in Poly Point. Man, it was a blast. I enjoyed every Sunday. I got to stand in that pulpit and preach, and the magnitude of people that came in. But there was still something missing. And so the motive was false. It was obtuse. It was all out of shape. So God sends his prophet to straighten it out, because the priests and the prophets were guilty of giving the wrong signals. It's okay. We cry peace and safety when there is no peace. You want to know what the true measure of any church is? And there are some old boys that I know personally that would really, they wouldn't need anything but these next two verses and they could just take off. And in some ways I envy that. Here's the true measure of a nation, of a church. Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways, and see, and ask for the old paths. If going backwards is moving forward, I'm all for it. If going back to those old paths, those familiar paths that we once walked, if that's where we need to go as a nation, as a church, you say, you want to go all the way back to the days of Leave It to Beaver? No, I want to go back before that. When we didn't blush. When we didn't blush because there was not anything to blush over. We were proud in the right sense of the word. There was a certain pride there. Verse 15 says, were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? Get ready. Here it comes. Were they ashamed when they committed abomination? Nay, they were not at all ashamed. Neither could they blush. Therefore, they shall fall among them that fall at the time that I visit them. They shall be cast down, saith the Lord. I just touched on that last week. And the Lord just wouldn't leave me alone. And it's more than that department store. Laura showed me something on her phone on the way to church, and I thought, what? How dare they? You need to get back to the old paths. If what you're looking at, if what you're listening to, if what you're reading, if what you're doing, you think you do it in secret, it's not in secret, because he that created the heaven and the earth knows where you are. He knows where I am. And we don't blush anymore. I walked in that department store and walked right by that lady's underwear department and went, oh, that's nice. My grandmother would have slapped me silly. And you say, oh, you're just an old fuddy-duddy. You want to go back to the 50s. If that's what it takes to go forward, I like indoor plumbing. I'm all for it. I still want indoor plumbing. But hey, look, God's telling Jeremiah, they don't blush anymore. Well, how bad could it have been? You really want me to tell you? I wrote it down. I was writing it down when Keith came in. I'm going to read it to you. Whoever can get them to believe absurdities, can get them to commit atrocities. You know who said that? An atheist, Voltaire. If you can get them to believe this stuff, then you can get them to commit atrocities. We're not bashful. We don't blush anymore as a nation. My prayer is, God, help us to see we're not fooling you. We're not fooling anybody. And so that measure of security, that false message that everything's okay, well, don't worry about it. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32. Remember, I preached that, confronting the chaos. Any nation that begins to, they wanted us to acknowledge them. And I'm not picking on anybody in particular, just everybody in general. They wanted us to acknowledge them. If you just acknowledge us, we're going to come out of the closet. What was it, Voltaire? What does he say? If you can get them to believe the absurdities, you can get them to commit the atrocity. So, Romans chapter 1, the nation who acknowledges, who says, all right, you can come out of the closet. But that wasn't enough, was it? Remember, this is a digression. It's not enough to acknowledge them. And not just that. Now they want you to embrace them. You need to be more loving. You're right, I do. I need to be more loving. I need to love them enough to confront them. It wasn't enough to embrace the final step. They want us to participate. We go from acknowledging to embracing to participating. And when we go that far, God says, that's it. I'll turn my back on that nation. I'll turn my back on that person. I will give them over to a reprobate mind. So Jeremiah has been given this message in the midst of this false motive and these false messages. And the true measure of a church, of a nation is, thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways and see. Ask for the old paths. Where is the good way? God says that. I didn't. It's the good way. And walk therein. And ye shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. We will not walk therein. Also, I set watchmen over you. In some ways, I'm a watchman. You're a watchman. I've set watchmen over you. Hearken unto the sound of the trumpet. But they said, we will not hear. We won't listen. You know what scares me about Generation Z? Is that in a poll taken by Harvard, 60% of their constituency said this: they can sympathize with a terrorist. When did we start listening to terrorists? When did we start bargaining with terrorism? When did we stop and say, that's a good idea? Did you know that there were more parades, more protests, more propaganda distributed in America than from the Arabs that were in Israel? We did that. That's what scared me about this last election, was the popular vote. You have got a world of people that don't want to go that way. They think that moving forward is to be, and I've used this word before, diversity, diverse. Their diversity and what I believe is diverse are two different things. And so, there's the final mandate. And what is that? Well, he gives it. He gives it to Jeremiah. And for 42 years, this guy's got to preach the same message. He says, here's the final mandate. Therefore, hear ye nations. Not just Israel. Not just Saudi Arabia. I saw something last night, just by way of I was curious. I turned on the LIV Golf Network. They're golfing at night in Saudi Arabia. And I thought to myself, we are being duped on every level. They're sucking us in. Now, there are some in the PGA that think that they shouldn't play there. I'm not going to get into that. I don't know. Last time I played golf, it was awful. Therefore, hear ye nations, and know, O congregation, what is among them. Here's what I'm going to leave you with. I want you to understand the difference between geopolitics and theopolitics. This is about an idea. It's about killing God. The notion of God, the fear of God is almost non-existent. And I'm talking about a healthy fear. I'm not talking about, and I'm going to probably get some flack for this one, but I'm not talking about the foolishness that came out of the 50s and 60s. About dress, the kind of songs that you may or may not sing, your hair. I was at a revival when I was 18 and the guy's name was Black. It fit his personality. By the time we got finished, there wasn't nothing that you could do unless you had a razor cut. We're talking, if I use that word, I'm trying to think, if I use the word butch, that might have a negative connotation. I don't want to use that word. But the word, what word need I to use?
White walls.
White walls, there you go. Unless I'm white-walled, dressed in a three-piece suit with a wide tie. Now, by the way, I kept some of those things because I figure sooner or later they're going to come back in style. But I'm not talking about foolish things. I'm talking about your heart, about whether you know God or not. I'm going to ask you a question when I ask you to bow your head. It's a simple question. You're not answering to me. I'm not the spiritual Gestapo around here. I don't think we have one of those. But I want you to bow your head. And here's the question. It's a simple question. Do you know God? Do you know him? If you don't, you ought to get up right now, wherever you are, and walk down here to the front, and I'll show you how to be saved. Don't leave here lost. Well, I'm not done. I have another question. It's to the saved. Are you walking with God? Don't you think you can fake me out all day long? You can fool me, you can fool this church, but you can't fool God. Are you walking with God in the old paths, in the things that are right, in the things that are good? You feel that heat on the back of your neck? That's called conviction. You may or may not like everything I just said, but you need to understand that Reformation will not bring revival. Revival starts with us. It starts with me. It starts with you. Lord, I pray that this morning you help me to walk with you. You help me to walk in the purity of a conscience that's clear, of a heart that's right, made right by the imputed righteousness, what you gave to me the day I received you. The day I asked you to save me, you gave me righteousness. Lord, my prayer is not just for the nation in general, but in particular. Help our leaders, help the people that fashion what we call America. Help them to see the need to go back to the old paths, the good ways, the ways that you bless and you honor. Lord, help me to reject those things that are not. My prayer this morning is that you will bring revival, and it'll start right now with me. With me. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.